And we're back like we never left. Oregon fans, what's going on? How we living? Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres, reporter over at ScoopDuck on 3. It is Monday, May 6th, 2024, coming to you from Long Beach, California. Got an exciting episode of the pod in store for you guys today. We have an Oregon football, Oregon recruiting, maybe some hoops possibly, a mailbag episode of the pod, and we're going to get into a lot of the recent happenings around the Oregon football program with an emphasis on recruiting and the following football season coming up in 2024. But before we get into that, the Ducks Dish podcast is brought to you in part by Ranchito Grill in Springfield. Not sure what your dinner plans are for tonight, but head on over to Ranchito Grill at 1537 Mohawk Boulevard. Try their homemade tortillas. They got great food, a great environment, and they will take care of you. Say what's up to my guy Ruben and let him know that Max Torres sent you. Not rolling solo on today's episode of the podcast. I am joined by Travis Rooke-Ley for a special guest on today's episode. Travis, man, it's great to see you. And how the heck are you?
Pretty good, Max. Just great to be with you. Great to have you back at ScoopDuck and on 3, and just excited to talk some football on a Monday. Season's getting closer, so life's good.
It definitely is. It definitely is. We are one day closer to the football season in Eugene. If people read ScoopDuck or if they are in the Oregon football community, they probably know your name. But just so we are all on the same page here, just tell us a little bit about your background and kind of what you got going on as far as Oregon football.
Yeah, for sure. Eugene's always been home and been going to games since I was little. My high school years were just when Oregon was getting good, 2005 to 2008. So really grew up with it, and Oregon's always been a huge passion of mine. And kind of jumbled with my workload right now, but you can find a lot of stuff I'll put out on Twitter, do some work over for Justin, writing some weekly takeaways and different things over at ScoopDuck, and then involved in some content stuff that's still to come through Ducks Rising, which is a one end of kind of the Oregon collective that works with different athletes and linking up the new spaces in this crazy college football world. So good to be here and hopefully make this somewhat of a regular thing.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, so that's who Travis is. If you guys don't know, now you know. Make sure you tap in with him on Twitter/X at Travis Rooke-Ley right there on the screen if you're watching us on the ScoopDuck YouTube channel. If you're watching us on the ScoopDuck YouTube channel, do me a favor, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment letting us know what you're thinking about Oregon football recruiting. We are so close to 1,000 subscribers. We have absolutely exploded since I got back to ScoopDuck, and the support has been tremendous. So I appreciate all of you for doing that. And then rate the Ducks Dish podcast. Just show us some love wherever you can. So, Travis, like I said, we're doing a little bit of mailbag in today's episode. I originally put out a post over on the ScoopDuck boards last week asking for questions, and then we got like an explosion of of news for the Ducks. So that obviously threw a little bit of a wrench into things. Before we get into any questions, most of them coming from the ScoopDuck readers and subscribers, let's recap this weekend, man, because it was absolutely nuts.
Yeah, man. I mean, I had a feeling Friday, once the Wyatt commitment, at first he just said, hey, I'm going to announce at noon, and that broke kind of out of the blue. I think a lot of us felt like that one was a long time coming. I remember even November, December last year thinking he was probably going to jump in the boat one of these minutes. So that broke. We already had a feeling about Woodyard because he was in town. So we were, staying tuned there. But to me, Derek Hartman is the biggest of the bunch. I think in terms of the 2024 team, he's that last piece that a lot of us had circled. And man, 3 commitments, 3 days? Hell of a time in Eugene. I think you see more and more guys starting to line up things. So it's really clear to me that Dan and the rest of the staff are really making a push in terms of not only finishing out that portal class for 24, but moving into to 25 and beyond.
Yeah, this Nasir Wyatt commitment was probably one of the biggest ones for me as far as the 25 class goes, Travis, because I've been saying that Nasir Wyatt's going to end up at Oregon since November of last year. I wasn't really able to make like the formal predictions over at my last spot, but I put in an RPM last week that I thought this was going to happen. So definitely felt like a matter of when, not if, for Oregon and Nasir Wyatt. Now that he's in the fold, I think that he can kind of be that piece that Tosh Lapoy and the rest of the coaching staff build around with Oregon's defensive haul here in 2025. And then obviously this is a big commitment for what they're trying to do at Mater Dei, even just in the 2025 class with guys like Jordan Davison, Chuck McDonald. They're really setting up shop there. And it's just another example of how well this staff has attacked the Golden State of California, which has really become their bread and butter. That's kind of the nucleus of each of these recruiting classes, which they've done an awesome job leveraging or filling out with the transfer portal.
Well, and you see, I mean, to me, I think it started with Dylan Williams last year, but you see these West Coast defensive prospects more and more alluding to the fact that, hey, if I'm going to stay home, if I'm going to stay on the West Coast, it's Eugene. And for Lanning to have established himself that early on as, hey, I'm staying anywhere close to home and I'm coming up to Oregon, like that is so huge if you think about last year's defensive class combined with guys like Wyatt moving forward. I mean, the West Coast isn't littered with defensive talent, but between Northern California, Southern California, and your guys you get on and off from Oregon, Washington, for Oregon just to be that school, man, growing up and fighting USC for battles, I didn't think I'd ever see the day.
It's a new era that Dan Lanning has really ushered in at Oregon. And to be just completely candid, we have to give USC a little bit of credit because it's not like they're doing nothing in Southern California. I was writing a little bit about it earlier today in my Torres's Take, which is over on ScoopDuck. You can try us out for a whole month for just $1. So I think it's a pretty good bang for your buck. But USC has not done a good job in Southern California. They've gotten a couple of guys, more so defensive guys. If we're just talking about that, that's kind of been the big theme lately. Like they got Marcellus Williams out of St. John Bosco last cycle, but his brother was already at USC, Max Williams, so kind of felt like a gimme if you're asking for my opinion. And then they also have a talented linebacker out of San Clemente, California, that's committed in the 2025 class. Apologies for not knowing his name. So they're doing some work there, but when you're looking at the truly elite defensive guys, like a Peyton Woodyard a cycle ago, he was committed to Georgia, flipped to Bama, and then now he enters the portal amid the transition to Kalen DeBoer. Oregon's cleaning shop, man. They're cleaning house with the top SoCal defensive prospects, with Aiden Breland being another one of them who just absolutely pancaked that guy in the last clip. But yeah, I'm excited about this Woodyard commitment. I think that, you know, it's not like I don't expect him to be a major contributor right away. And I think people maybe need to pump the brakes a little bit as far as just like how game changing of an addition this is, but it really helps your depth. And because I'm as big of a Woodyard fan as anybody you'll find, getting to cover him in high school, but to be able to get him out of the portal, I think the relationships are huge. And obviously the visuals, the optics of it all are just tremendous.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that as far as Woodyard goes, I mean, I don't think he contributes a ton, but I think he's going to play. I think him and Aaron Flowers are going to play. You know, obviously, Coach Hampton, Coach Wadood, Coach Lanning, those guys have prioritized like really flipping the safety room. I think for those of us diehards, we've been watching the safeties over the past 3, 4, 5 years and, you know, just looking for a different level of athlete back there. And I think the spot the room is in today with Ty Sheen back there, you know, vocal leader, knows the defense, probably in his best spot. You bring in Kobe Savage, and then you got these 3 young guys between Flowers, Woodyard, and Lopa. I mean, that room's in better shape than we've seen in a long time. And what's crazy is we can say that about almost every positional group at Oregon right now. It's just a whole nother level. I really didn't think I'd see the day that we got to this type of roster in Eugene.
To wrap up my thoughts on this little weekend recap, Travis, the Derek Harmon edition is just, my God. I mean, that was just awesome for the Ducks to be able to reel him in from Michigan State, especially when he entered the portal, visited Oregon. Then he said, no, never mind. I'm going to stay. Actually, I want to leave. And then he ended up at Eugene after all the hoopla and everything that was going on there. I think for Oregon's defensive line to be as talented as it was a year ago with Dorless, Popo, Casey Rogers, Birch, Mateo, they had so many good pieces, lost a lot of good pieces. Now this group might be even better than it was last year. I think that might be stretching it a little bit just because we don't know what they're going to look like altogether just yet. But the depth of talent that you have there, you're starting four, which I think is probably Birch, Caldwell, Harmon, and Mateo. And then you have some other guys in that room like Amari Washington and Michael Gardner. And then just staying on the D line like Tatum Tuioti as well. He was a beast as a true freshman. Like those guys all probably project to take steps forward, and you're going to be able to rotate all these guys, and it's going to be tough for offensive coordinators and offensive staffs to just zero in on one dude, because then you have another guy. Like if you double team Birch, then you have Mateo on the other side. If you double team Caldwell, then you got Harmon to deal with. Like there's just so many different ways I think that this Oregon defense is really set up for success in 2024, and it starts in the trenches.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think it's a stretch to say that I'm convinced this D-line is better. I love Popo, I love Rogers, I love what those guys like meant to Oregon, but like this is a different level of animal moving forward. I mean, between Birch, Caldwell, Harmon, Mateo, if that's your starting four, I mean that's borderline elite across the board. That's a top 5 defensive line in the country. I don't know that I've ever said that as an Oregon fan. And for Harmon specifically, I mean, I think that recruitment encapsulated like Dan and Marshall and this staff perfectly in terms of entered the portal again, took some other visits. All the chatter was out there about all these different schools. And there you have Dan and Marshall laying in the weeds, working away at him, made a big in-home visit, and he pops. I just think that this staff and their approach to like the current day and age with the portal, with NIL, with building a roster is just elite.
It certainly feels that way. Just they're so dialed in, and then from some of the conversations that I've had with people from within the program, they're just in lockstep with what feels like every single move they're making. They're not taking a guy unless everybody's on the same page, things like that. Everyone's on board. So this does feel like a truly new era of Oregon football, if nothing else, just in the talent acquisition part of it. And we got to remember here, Travis, getting the guys on the roster, that's only half the battle. Now you got to put it together and try to chase something special on the field. But I absolutely think that Oregon is in a great position to do just that. Let's get into some of these mailbag questions, man. You put this nice little pretty Google Doc together for us, so I'm gonna let you kind of have the reins here and get us going and organize this.
Yeah, let's do it. First question that came through, something I've been thinking about recently. Now that almost everyone has gone through spring practice, how would you rank the Big Ten, and who makes up your top 10 nationally? So I was actually doing a little thought exercise earlier. To me, Oregon and Ohio State are a clear tier 1. I think just in terms of the offense and defense that those teams are going to bring. I know some people have Michigan in that top tier. For me personally, like elite defensive line, couple playmakers, but the quarterback question to me just leaves them in tier 2. Penn State to me, I think, is its own tier again in tier 3. I'm intrigued by their new offensive coordinator hire who's coming over from Kansas, who's very, very well regarded. I'm not even going to try to pronounce his last name. Their offense, like I had belief in Drew Aller before, and then I watched him last year and watched their offense last year, and it was disgusting. So I think there's potential there, but I didn't feel like I could bump them any higher than that at first. After that, I feel like we get to just a huge group of wild cards. SC, Iowa, Wisconsin, Nebraska. I feel like all those schools like have potential or have pieces in different ways. SC obviously has talent. Iowa always finds a way to, you know, have the best defense and special teams you can imagine, but I can't watch their offense play football. And then Wisconsin, Nebraska, I've always been a Luke Fickell guy. I thought he was going to do big things there. I had a little rough first go. They bring in Tyler Van Dyke. I could see it working out. I could see them going 6-6. And then the last team I had in that tier was Nebraska.
For wild card?
Yeah, I don't know what your thoughts are on Raiola. I think Matt Rule's a good coach. I could see them being the fourth best team in the Big Ten next year.
Yeah, I think Nebraska, with them being a wild card, I feel like that's the perfect way to describe it, because one thing that's really seemed to change with Matt Rule, I don't even know where they're at in the rankings, but like one thing that I feel like almost immediately changed in Lincoln when he got hired was their talent acquisition and recruiting. So I think that he kind of has them humming, but we just have to see what that product looks like on the field. They don't normally get a Dylan Raiola caliber guy at quarterback, but Matt Rule's trying to make that the norm. I think he was a little bit overhyped as a recruit. Not to say that he wasn't good, but like when I saw him in person at the Elite 11 last year, you see some of these guys throwing the ball, and it's like it's humming off their hand. Like you can audibly hear it. And I didn't really see that with Raiola. And he's built, you know, like he's got a pretty thick frame, but is a really good athlete. I don't know if I'd say he's a dangerous runner. So I'm just curious to see how he steps into the spotlight, because they have all their chips in, it feels like, on Raiola just being a special talent. But I think that Rule still has them going kind of in the right direction. You have a community and a city that is all in on the Huskers. They don't have any like pro teams or anything like that, at least as far as like football and basketball goes that I know about, even baseball as well. So I think they're definitely a wild card. I'm curious that I guess USC would be a wild card. I think I agree with the rest of the ones that you talked about, Oregon and Ohio State being up there at the top. And then Michigan, I think quarterback's just too big of a question mark to talk about them with a whole lot of certainty. I think it's Alex Orji is his name, the quarterback that's probably stepping in there. He played a lot last year, but mostly in like running situations. So we just haven't seen him throw a lot of passes. And then Penn State always kind of feels like they're one quarterback away. And I'm right there with you. I kind of thought Drew Aller was going to be a guy that could potentially get them over the hump, but it was another rough year out there. So yeah, Penn State, that's got to be a frustrated fan base now that I think about it. Just like with all the hype that they have every year, they're pretty solid. I think they're always in the top 15 at least when it comes to recruiting. But I think for kind of what you said so far, I agree with it for the most part. And then you kind of have the bottom tier or tier 4. I don't know how deep you go on your tiers, but there's a lot of other teams that we haven't mentioned just yet.
Yeah, I mean, I had just two more. Tier 5, Washington, Rutgers, Maryland, Michigan State. I mean, I think there's obviously with UW we can go in depth there, and I'm sure would at some point. But turning over a whole roster, I just as hard as it is for me to say, I think Jed Fish is a pretty good offensive coach and a base level of competency I think that he'll bring. And then that last tier, I don't know if you've got any intel or thoughts on these teams, but I can't say I've done a huge study yet. Northwestern, UCLA, Minnesota, Illinois, Indiana, Purdue.
Yeah, I think that all sounds pretty good. I feel like for UCLA, being someone that's located in SoCal, that's a school along with USC, right, that I'm always kind of trying to keep my ear out for and see what's going on there. But I feel like they're making all the right moves that they can under Deshaun Foster. I mean, there's a tangible change in their recruiting approach. They're actually sending out a lot of offers. I feel like the sheer volume of recruiting offers that I see in my timeline, in my feed, is drastically more than it was under Chip Kelly. They're going after local talent. One of the guys I've seen a lot of is 2026 Santa Margarita Catholic wide receiver Jonas Smith. Used to be at Mater Dei, now he's at Santa Margarita. He's committed to the Bruins early here, so I think that there's a lot of work to do out there in Westwood, but I think that there's just a different energy around that program, and people are actually excited about UCLA football now compared to how it's been the last couple of years that I've been out here. It's just not something that moves the needle for a lot of people. But yeah, a lot of those bottom programs like, Purdue, Minnesota, like they've kind of just been sticking around there, and you don't really know what you're going to get out of them. And then Michigan State, obviously there's work to do. And what does year 1 look like? with Jonathan Smith in East Lansing. Is Aiden Childs the guy that they really needed at quarterback? He's someone I've covered a little bit, seeing that he was also a SoCal kid out of Downey. I really liked what I saw from him in high school, but I don't know what he looks like in college yet. So he's got all the tools, but what is he going to look like? So I think I'm in pretty good agreement. I mean, I'm not trying to just make it an easy show by any means, but I don't know. Like I'm trying to lean into more Big Ten, like big picture stuff. But I think all the stuff that we've talked about so far, it just makes sense to put Oregon up there with what they've been able to do, their body of work so far, and then some of the question marks like that you have with the roster turnover at Washington. Can USC play defense? What does Miller Moss look like outside of one bowl game? There's just too much unknown, I think, to put them any higher than we have. That's why I like the wild card tier.
Yeah, and I think that, well, I mean, it kind of leads into one of the other questions on here, was just about like kind of a look at the schedule and trap games within it. What I think what gives me the biggest amount of optimism and what's been so incredible about the way, Dan has built this roster is there's just going to be such a huge talent gap for Oregon in 8, 9, 10 of these games that you just haven't seen as this staff has built the roster over the past few years. You just haven't seen those like let up games that we used to expect. As early as I can remember Oregon football, certain road games, these trap games, just playing down to our opponents, whether it was Washington State, whether it was down in the desert. Dan, to his credit, there hasn't been many games I can think of where the guys haven't been up and we haven't like eventually, taken control with that just like difference in talent. And this is the most talented roster we've ever had. So I look at the Purdue game, for example, right after Ohio State. Let's say we win that game, obvious like trap game, letdown game. I just
Coming
don't
off of an emotional high.
Totally. And 5 years ago, I'm scared to death of that game. But the way this roster is set up, the Purdue's of the world, Indiana, we go to UCLA. I just don't see between this staff and this roster, like those games having that true, letdown effect.
Yeah, and that's a really good point as far as just the consistency that Dan Lanning's been able to get out of his guys every week. I'll be totally honest, Travis. When they came out in that Pac-12 title game, I'm like, oh my god, I flew to Oregon to watch Oregon get absolutely stomped. And to their credit, they didn't. They had a pretty awful start, about as bad of a start as you could have asked for, but they were able to turn it around and they were right in it until the very end. So I think the Purdue one's a good one, especially after the Ohio State game. Purdue's not usually that great, but they beat Ohio State. I think it was my freshman year of college back in 2016, something like that.
Yep.
Like they're definitely Pac-12 after dark vibes, Big Ten after dark vibes. I guess we have to get used to saying now. So I think that's a good pick. I'd also throw Wisconsin in there because that's on the road at Camp Randall, mid-November. Maybe it's going to be snowing, probably going to be cold as hell. But I think that's a one you have to put on there. You could also mention Washington as a trap game just because it's at the very end of the year and it's a rivalry game and we just don't know what we're going to get from Washington. But I kind of feel like that goes without saying, and maybe it's not correct to call that a trap game, but I'm going to go Wisconsin as my trap game pick.
That's a good pick. And I mean, I think that's the most natural. You set up that Wisconsin team, that environment, that time of year. I'm definitely not sleeping easy before that one. But I'll tell you, man, when it comes to UW, as someone who was up in Seattle last year and then in Vegas, that November 30th game in Eugene cannot come faster for me. I just, I can't say much more than that. Tough one. But I think that's the thing about Lanning in this program is where he's gotten it to is like, we've lost some tough games in big situations and it's came down to about 3 or 4 plays. That's correctable to me. That's the coaching piece. That's the roster building. I think that what was so frustrating about previous years, it just felt like there were certain games we didn't get up for or roster wasn't in a place to compete. I don't know. I just couldn't be more optimistic about, this year and where things are heading.
Talking with my guy Travis Rooke-Ley here on a Monday afternoon. Thank you so much for being here for another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. Reminder, if you're here on YouTube, do us a favor, like, comment, subscribe. All those good things are a tremendous help to the channel and what we're doing here. We just got finished talking about some tiers in the Big Ten and maybe some trap games for the Ducks heading into 2024. Travis, what's next for us? What you got?
Yeah, let's kind of on the same vein. We've got a question here. What is the one thing Oregon must do right to make the playoffs and seriously compete for a championship? And what is one thing Oregon could do wrong to prevent them from achieving those goals?
Oof, this is a really good big picture one. Man, I I think I really feel like, kind of to your last point about some of the close losses last year to Washington, it's just going to come down to execution, which kind of feels like a cop out. But that was I mean, I even saw that one on the list, and I was kind of like, oh dang, caught me off guard. But that's like a really big question, right? So I feel like just executing in the biggest moments is going to be huge. Just having poise in those moments and acting like you've been there before, and they have a lot of veterans on this roster that I think can help them do that. Dylan Gabriel is certainly one of them, because he's played in some big games during his college career. And I think that that's really Bo Nix's experience last year was something that I think had a massive trickle down effect on the rest of the team. I mean, they were always locked in. They didn't have any huge leads that I can recall that they squandered or anything to that effect. So I really feel like it's probably just execution and taking care of things. I think that you gotta get up for these road. I think every road game that they have next year, even if it is a bad team, like I was kind of talking about this yesterday with Justin, and he talked about how kind of one of the biggest question marks for this next year's team is just the unknown. So it's like, sure, you're playing some of these bottom end or not as good Big Ten teams, like in your head, that's kind of how you look at them, but you haven't necessarily played a bunch of road games in that kind of environment, in the cold weather necessarily. It gets cold in Eugene, obviously, but like it's just a different kind of animal. And I'm not saying that I don't think Oregon is up for that. I think that they're going to be incredibly competitive, and they might even win the whole thing as far as the Big Ten goes. But you just got to be locked in. You can't let anything psych you out. You can't be complacent with anything. And I think that really goes back to the culture that Lanning's building. So I feel like that's really the biggest thing, is just executing when it matters the most, and not freezing up in those big moments.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you think about the, two losses last year, some of the losses the year prior. I mean, it's not like those games are uncompetitive. Those games are executing 2-3 plays differently, and that's a whole different story. So I think that's on point there. I mean, the two ways I went with that, in terms of things we could do wrong or would prevent us. I mean, I'm a little concerned about tackle depth beyond Connerly and Cornelius. So the first place my mind jumps, knock on wood, would be like an injury to one of those tackles. I think that would leave us in a little bit of a dicey spot if we're talking about really competing for a title. And then I think the other piece is just, in terms of things needing to break right, this 12-team playoff and the seeding in the bracket is going to be super interesting. I think as you come down to the end of the season, the seeding around, who makes it to Indianapolis and plays in the Big Ten championship game, and what are the stakes of that? The way it's set up with the 4 auto berths is super interesting, and I would say not ideal for a team like Oregon that's going to be competing for the top of the title with Ohio State. One of those teams in theory is going to be ranked first or second, and be in a great spot with a bye. The other team, if you're in that 5-6 slot, you're in a great spot. You're going to host a game in Eugene, but that 6, 7, 8 area is a little bit iffy territory. And so what I'm really interested in to see as the end of the season comes along, how are they going to incentivize teams that make a conference championship game and lose? Are they going to incentivize a team for sitting at home and not playing? When you were bringing up that Wisconsin and Washington game, there's a world in which not making it to Indianapolis is a more favorable outcome, which is wild to say and think about. So I guess my cop-out easy answer in regards to this would just be, things got to break right I mean, in terms of the execution you're talking about, in terms of the seeding I'm talking about, to win a title, you need some luck. I think our roster and our coaching's at a spot where like we're ready to win, but you still need those breaks. And so I'm really interested to see how that looks at the end of the year and how things shake out in a favorable way, hopefully for us.
And the thing I'll say to that, Travis, as far as looking at the big picture and needing things to break the right way in the playoff, all those things, I think that there's good and bad with this expanded playoff, right? You have a bigger margin for error, right? You don't have to win every single game. Heck, you can drop a game or two. That's never the goal, obviously, but still, there's always been a big difference. And I feel like Josh Pate is the one that kind of planted this one in my mind. You know, he does an awesome job with the Late Kick podcast. There's such a colossal difference between making the playoff and winning a playoff game and winning the national championship, which implies winning multiple playoff games. So yeah, it might be easier for Oregon to get back to the playoff for the first time since its debut. But if they really want to go and win this entire thing, you've got to win multiple playoff games. And with this expanded playoff, I'm pretty sure you're going to end up playing more quality games that you have to show up for. So tougher, in theory, games. But fortunately for the Ducks, a reason to be confident. You just played in what is one of the best years we've ever seen of Pac-12 from top to bottom, and you're playing in a quality conference now that you're in the Big Ten.
Yeah, totally. And I think that, I mean, coming off of this weekend and looking where this roster is, I mean, I don't think you can find many Duck fans out there, myself included, who are happy just making the playoffs this year. It's, you know, the level of investment in this staff, in this roster, in this program in general. I think everyone involved is expecting for sure making it past that first weekend and deep in there too. And I think all of us can say pretty confidently, who know some of the inner workings of those things, like everyone here thinks like it's a title year. It's going to win a national title, and that's like a real thing that's on the table with this roster and everything in place.
Totally agree.
All right, let's move on. Couple more things about the roster. I think I may have just answered one of these questions, but interested in hearing your thoughts. What would you say is the biggest position of strength on the roster, and what would be your biggest weakness?
Yeah, I think, gosh, the biggest position of strength, I think if you're looking at that, you probably I think of depth or just pure talent, top to bottom. I think I got to go receiver. I mean, you could easily make the case for running back with the guys they have there, but I think I'm going to give receiver talent the nod here, because I don't think we've seen this level of talent from top to bottom in a wide receiver room at Oregon in my time covering this. I mean, to think that I was covering this team when they had your Dylan Mitchell, Johnny Johnson, and Jalen Red, like love Jalen Red, so much respect to him. But like the fact that Oregon was playing with like a 5'8", maybe 5'9" receiver, like just the caliber of talent that they have at their disposal in that room, and guys that might not even see the field this year because there's so much talent. It's a different era of wide receiver play, and I think that I'm super excited about that, because for as good as Oregon's been mostly during my life, you know, I know I'm a younger guy at 26, so I haven't been there for all of the ups and downs necessarily. Oregon really hasn't been a place that has elite wide receiver play, and Junior Adams is doing everything he can to change that, and I think he's off to a pretty good start.
Man, I just think back to sitting in the crowd at that Auburn game in 2019. And I remember after the game, all just the criticism Herbert was receiving. And I remember just thinking, boy, if you could have seen, there was not a receiver open that entire second half. And just to compare that to today is truly, I mean, we go 6, 7, 8 deep. I mean, just the Jeremiah McClellan in the spring game. Still guys coming in this summer. That room is in a place that all credit to Junior. I can't can't believe what's happened in regard to that.
It's pretty phenomenal. I think that we really kind of started to see this shift in the 2021 class when the Ducks brought in a trio of All-Americans, Troy Franklin, Dante Thornton, Isaiah Brevard. Only two of those guys actually ended their college careers with Oregon. Dante's over at Tennessee now. I'm actually not sure where Isaiah Brevard is. So I think you have to give some credit to Brian McClendon, who was the wide receiver coach when that transition was taking place. But yeah, that room's insane. I mean, I think Jaron Dickey has to be the guy I'm watching the closest in that room. He's a Bay Area guy, so I'm a little bit biased being from the Bay, but I really want to see him do well because I think he's like one of the highest rated receivers the Ducks have ever gotten, other than Cameron Colvin. He's a guy I remember always seeing kind of in that upper echelon. As for the weakest position, I don't know if we can call it a weakness just with where we're at in the calendar right now. I think it's kind of more like a question mark or just uncertainty. I got to go safety. I hate to say it, but I think I have to go safety. I know that they just added Woodyard. They had Savage. Brandon Johnson isn't here yet, so we don't necessarily know what he looks like in this group. But I think below or past that front line, the starting guys there at safety, we just don't really know what the Ducks have there. Aaron Flowers has a lot of people excited, but how is he actually going to look once the year starts? We can't make that projection just based off of a spring game. We can say, oh man, he looked damn good, but like we don't know if he's going to be Javon Holland or like an Evan Williams. Like there's just still so many places to go because he's so young and we just haven't seen very much of him. So I'm really excited and intrigued by the talent that they have at that room, but until I see them be able to take a step forward and put a better product on the field than we saw last year, I'm not ready just yet. But boy, am I excited about that safety room just to see what they look like.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the piece that gives me hope is that beyond Ohio State, I don't think there's a team on our schedule that can test us like, say, a Washington did last year. And so I think, thankfully, a lot of these offenses you look at on our schedule are a lot more like, say, a Utah that we're used to than a Washington. And I think knowing that even a guy like Tysheem Johnson, Kobe Savage, these guys we brought in to give these younger guys a little bit time to grow into that role. Like Tysheem was awesome against Utah last year. That's a perfect type of team for him. I totally trust him against a Michigan State, an Indiana team like that. So I think that thankfully we have till the playoff, fingers crossed, to get those freshmen ready to like really contribute at a high level to where their skill set like will be needed.
Very true. Very true. Yeah, I think that's the other point because I talked about this with Justin yesterday after Woodyard committed, just about the Big Ten not being so pass heavy compared to last year in the Pac-12. But I mean, even to that point, like you don't want to wait until the playoffs to get your safeties playing the best ball they can. I guess maybe you do on one hand, right? Because you want to be kind of peaking or playing your best ball come conference title weekend or the playoff. But yeah, I think I say safety. For all the reasons I just said.
Yeah. And I think I just mention and think about offensive line, not in terms of the starters, but just in terms of, I think there are some depth questions. I know there's been a few backups with some nicks and knacks and some small injury concerns, and just not having, I mentioned it earlier, just not having tackles who have played a bunch as our, 3 and 4 guys or swing tackles if something were to happen to Connerly or Cornelius. But that's what non-conference is for. That's what early season is for. That's one of the huge benefits. I think I've heard QB talk about this with Georgia some, but when you're at the level of roster we are, and these games are in hand by halftime, like hopefully some of our first 3-4 games will be, that's when these developmental reps are huge. That's when you can run some guys out there, George Silva, Kawika Rogers, throw them out there for a half. That's the only way they're getting better. So I really like the way our schedule sets up and hope that first 3, 4, 5 games can be used to get some of these guys we need or may need down the stretch. Some reps to where come November, guys are banged up, come playoff, that's going to be a grind of a schedule. our depth has really been like built out in that way.
Certainly has. And that's a really good point about the non-conference as far as just getting those guys up to speed a little bit. George Silva is someone that a lot of people are excited about and were excited about when he committed because he was one of the top JUCO guys nationally. But that's when, like, you know, I get excited that I'm down here and I get to go out and see him and talk to him, talk to his camp, his coaches. That dude hasn't played a lot of football. So it's like you are banking on, you know, things being able to fall into place, but also you got to have some confidence in Alik Terry. I mean, look at what that guy did, Mike Kavanaugh, the rest of that staff, what they did from 2022 to 2023. Everybody damn near was expecting some kind of a drop off, and then they got better, and they were a Joe Moore Award finalist. So I think you are banking on some of those younger pieces maybe being ready to contribute for you, like a Kavika Rogers, like a Dave Iuli. I know those guys, at least Iuli isn't a tackle, but I think you're putting your faith in Terry here a little bit, but I think it's warranted.
For sure. Let's go last question here. Probably get into some different guys. What new players are you most excited to see play this year?
Ooh, let's go one on offense and one on defense. I feel like that's a good approach for us here. I think going on offense, I'm gonna go Sadiq, Kenyon Sadiq.
Oh, you thief. You thief.
I was like, oh, everyone's probably thinking about that. But I'll let you get first crack at the defensive guy. How about that? We'll trade off that way. But with the excitement around Kenyon, I think that he just looks like he's someone that can do a lot of different things for this offense. I just keep replaying that pop pass to him out of the backfield. He's one of the fastest guys on this roster, and I don't think a lot of people necessarily know that. Haven't gotten to see a ton of it showcased a little bit in the spring game, right? But with Terrence Ferguson and Patrick Herbert entering their last years, I think it's to the staff's advantage, or they would be behooved. Never know if I'm using that right, but I think I'm using that right. What a weird phrase that is. It would behoove them, Travis, to play Kenyon Sadiq a fair amount this year, because you don't want to get to the end of the year and say, well, hey, what are we doing at tight end? No, now we have this guy who's played a lot of football for us in his first 2 years. He's comfortable. He's gotten his body a lot more college ready. He's up to 240 pounds, it sounds like, and the dude can run. So that's a versatile weapon that I can't wait to see what Will Stein can do with him this year.
Yeah, and took the words out of my mouth completely. And I think the thing about Sadiq, to bring us back to, where Landon came from in Georgia, again, you saw the success Georgia had with athletic tight ends and able to like catch other teams in certain defenses and just roll, no huddle, no substitutions. And honestly, Oregon, both under Kenny and now under Will Stein, has been super, super good at that over the last few years. Just in terms of, being able to run out 2-3 tight ends at a time, both being able to split out guys and being able to run power and just catch teams. And so I think that you're replacing now this year Casey Kelly with Kenyon Sadiq, an entirely different level of athlete. So I just see just the flexibility that's going to give Will Stein as a play caller in terms of in the run game, in the pass game, pop pass, like you mentioned. He's going to be just a huge, huge asset. I think we're going to see a lot of him pretty early on in the year. I think the other guy, naturally, you mentioned him earlier, would be Jurion. Everything you hear coming out of camp, coming out of practice says that guy is just different and makes plays on the outside that not many Oregon receivers have seen. I mean, I think he's an outside guy, but he's different than Troy in that he's not as slender. He's not a straight line guy, but he's more of just like a physical presence out there. And I think that that's something that Oregon has not had for a long time. So I'm hopeful he can stay healthy. He's been dinged up a little bit, obviously in the spring game, but that guy's got all the potential in the world. And as a physical presence, I think that's a piece we've not had for a long time out at receiver.
He does feel like he's just a different kind of guy that they haven't gotten very much chance to see thrive in this offense. I think that he can do a little bit of everything as your wide receiver. He can high point the ball. I think back to when Will Stein was talking about the Fiesta Bowl and how Jurion was taking the ball off defenders' heads, and that was a big growth period for him. He's comfortable in this offense, it feels like. I know that another point Stein made earlier this spring was just how it takes time. takes time to get comfortable in an offense like Oregon's or just a college offense in general. And if you can't be your best self if you're not confident and informed about what you're supposed to be doing. You can't just out athlete everyone if you're not in the right place, making the right adjustments, having the proper releases, whatever it might be. So I think he's someone that I'm really excited to just see. Like when I think about Jurion, I'm like, just get the dude the ball and just let him do the rest because he runs mean. He's tough. He's built. He's kind of transformed his body to a degree as he was coming out of that injury rehab and recovery. So sky's the limit is what it sounds like for Jurion, and now it's time to see him put it together.
100%, 100%. Yeah. Hey, defensively, I don't think it was much easier with all these dudes coming in, but I think my guy has to be Sione. I think it's
Okay.
Laulea is the last name. He just in terms of size, speed, athleticism, everything I've heard is that guy has an NFL future. What's crazy is there's a world in which he's not even starting for us. He might not even be our
You don't
third
need him
to. That DB room, I think getting back to that previous question, is so deep and loaded between Jabbar Muhammad, Cam Alexander, Jaleel Florence, who's been a little banged up. But I have to imagine that size, speed, athleticism, skill set is going to see the field. And I think he's the type of guy that's got an NFL future and can match up with some of those bigger outside receivers.
I wasn't even really thinking about him. That's a really good call, especially because he's not just like your typical true freshman. This is a guy who's played JUCO ball. He's seen a little bit more competition, I think, than some of your younger cats in the DB room. I think there's so many ways I could go. I feel like with this. I mean, I want to talk about Dakota Fields, but that kind of feels like a cop out because he got a pick in the spring game. I feel like I've been trying to pump him up based on what I was hearing leading up to the spring game. So I like to think I was a little bit of a head on the curve there. But I'm going to talk about the linebackers a little bit. I think Devin Jackson has to be one that you're super excited about. Because he doesn't have to start. So I think you can really find him and use him in the right situations if you need to spell Abasa or a Justin Jacobs. But his sideline to sideline coverage ability, his speed, he's put on weight since he came to Oregon in the 2022 class. He's kind of been the word I've always liked to use when you're learning behind veteran guys is marinating. I've been using that one this offseason a little bit on some podcasts, but you're developing behind some veteran guys and obviously Bassa, Jamal Hill, guys like that have been at that position. I think that those are great guys for him to learn behind, especially with Jamal Hill, because I feel like these guys are maybe athletically kind of on the same track, how they're built. I think Devin's way faster than Jamal was or is, but just athletic linebackers that are really built to do a lot of different things in this defense. One of the other things I kind of heard from someone close to the program a couple of weeks ago was that they told me that Jerry Mixon might end up being better than Jeffrey Bassa, which I think is really exciting because he's a guy who the Ducks signed in 23, the only linebacker they signed from the prep level in 23, by the way. But he was kind of making some plays flying around in that spring game. So he's someone I've kind of just bookmarked. I'm going to think back to, oh yeah, that person told me that in the spring if Jerry Mixon's making some plays there because they have so much young talent in that linebacker room. I mean, it's just so hard to fixate on just one.
Yeah, I mean, what's wild is I can remember back all the way through some of our best teams, and we've always had to play walk-on linebackers as depth. And I think it's safe to say with Matudi coming in, Platt coming in, Dylan Williams this summer, I mean, this once again, broken record, but this linebacker room is in a spot that we are lucky to have and haven't seen too often.
Betcher. Don't forget about Betcher. I feel like I've forgotten about him a little bit.
My
playing baseball.
Fellow South Eugene alum right there.
Yeah, man. There you go. And then I think Connor Sewelli's still on the team too. He's a transfer that they got from Arizona State before last year. So they have so many options there, and you really need the linebacker to be a deep room for you. And I think that Oregon's in an awesome spot there as well. So many players we're excited about, Travis. I mean, we're already almost to 50 minutes here. I think we probably wanted to wind it down, but just anything else you wanted to get to while we're recording?
I think we just got to make a PSA from the both of us that yes, the Ducks are done in the portal because
I feel like they have to be, right? Like I'm seeing that on the boards and I'm like, what are these people? What do they know that I don't know?
I mean, wishful thinking has me get some backup O linemen who want to leave a starting job to come be a backup here, but I don't think that's going to happen. So I'm comfortable saying yes, we're done, and Duck fans should be stoked at where the roster's at.
I think so too. I think that they're done. I mean, there were some names that you were maybe hoping hopped in the portal but didn't. But man, you got to be happy with this haul that the Ducks got going right now. Travis, before we wrap this thing up, man, let the people know where they can find you or just anything else you wanted to plug while you're on.
Yeah, for sure. Just grateful to be on, and you can find me on Twitter at Travis Rooke-Ley, and then I'll be on and off ScoopDuck kind of throughout the off season, especially come football season. And I'd just say one last plug for Ducks Rising. Any fan out there who wants to contribute towards really a cause that goes directly towards athletes. This is a huge way to do that. This college football world has changed in a lot of ways over the last few years, and players are getting contacted left and right from different people. And I think that putting Oregon in a great position to just be able to not only build their roster but retain their roster. And I know that Andrew and the guys over at Duck Rising are doing that every day and working hard to do that. So I would just encourage people to hop over to that site and check us out and see what we're doing over there.
Right on, right on. Well, you guys make sure to tap in with Travis. I mean, we kind of had some early conversations about maybe trying to do a weekly show. I would love that. I mean, this was an awesome convo, Travis, and it's just worlds easier doing this podcast thing when you got someone else to chop it up with. So I'm trying to get to 5 days on the pod. I'm not committing to that right now, but I really want to get the Ducks Dish podcast to 5 days a week if I can do it. So if you guys want to find more of me, make sure to tap in with me on social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all the same deal. At Torres Sports is where you can do that. Subscribe to the ScoopDuck YouTube channel here on YouTube, and then subscribe to ScoopDuck.com. Try us out. $1 gets you a whole month of awesome content. There is nowhere better to be if you are an Oregon football recruiting fan or just an Oregon fan, football fan. And then share the show, share the Ducks Dish podcast with your friends, with your family, and with other Duck fans. Big thank you to Travis for coming on. Thank you to you guys for being here and taking some time out of your day to talk ball with us. And we'll see you in the next episode of the Ducks Dish podcast.